CEO of the Rochester Museum Science Center, and I'd love to welcome you today. This is one of the most exciting things that in my short tenure that I have gotten to do. I am so proud to host the Gambit 1 optical system and to talk to you today about what it means for Rochester, what it means for our history, and what it potentially means for the future of our region. Welcome to Adam Bello, our recently elected county executive. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. Welcome to the research and engineering retirees who actually worked on the Gambit, mostly in secret. Welcome to our guests from the Center for the Study of National Reconnaissance, who have loaned this amazing piece of history to us to have on display for the future of RMSC. Welcome. And welcome to Kodak representatives where the project originated, and to L3 Harris representatives where the division continues to do great work today. Sorry, today. And thank you to the RMSC trustees and staff who helped bring this exhibit to fruition, especially to Dr. Jim Meyer, who made it really all happen. Today we celebrate a homecoming. We are thrilled to have the Gambit 1 optical system on exhibit at the RMSC. I can't think of a better location for this project than the Strasenburgh Planetarium for the home of this optical system. And again, to talk to the children that visit and to the families that visit and to you today about the future of technology in Rochester. Having this piece of technological history accessible to the public helps us recognize the engineering feats achieved here in Rochester more than 50 years ago, but also serves as an inspiration to the visitors about what could potentially be achieved in the technology of tomorrow. As a museum, we are tasked with telling the stories of the past to inspire the stories of the future. We are proud to be able to offer those who worked on the project an opportunity to finally view this technology in person, fully assembled for probably the first time, and for the family members like me of people who worked on this project that were never able to talk about it and passed on before they were able to. My grandfather probably worked on this project, I don't know. And I know that there are a lot of people in this room that have that same experience. Just to let you know, we plan to expand this exhibition. We will have a new case for the Gambit soon. We will have new lighting. And in 2021, we will be adding some technology experiences that are very interactive to go along with the project. We will have more photography that the Gambit took. We potentially will have a parachute that sent the film down. And that will be on the ceiling. So I'm really excited about that. It is cool. I heard somebody say that's cool. It is cool. By the way, this has been on display for a while, and when you have kids come in and see it, and they say, wow, what's that? And you say, that's the optical housing of the Gambit 1, and they say, oh. And then you say, wait a minute, it's a spy satellite. And they go, oh my gosh. Right? So for everyone else, we are really talking, this is a spy satellite. It is cool. It is amazing, and it is still inspiring people today. I'd like to invite Adam Bello, our newly elected county executive, to the stage to say a few words. Please welcome Adam Bello.
Thank you, Hillary, and yeah, that was me who said that's cool, and it is cool, and I love everything that you are doing here. It is really, really my honor to be here with all of you today. This is really a special day. I want to just start by thanking President Hillary Olson. I am so proud of the work that you are doing here at RMSC and in the planetarium here, and I'm proud that Monroe County is a strong supporter of this valuable community resource. RSMC is a first-class cultural attraction that helps spark interest in space and technology and mathematics, and helps tell the story of Rochester's rich history and innovation. And I was actually just here a few months ago on my daughter's field trip, and we're walking around, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but why are things like this so important is when I was here with I think it was her second grade class, we were walking around and looking, and you're inspiring young people. They can look at these, the spy satellite, they're looking at outer space, they're looking at these, and they're being inspired to challenge ourselves and be innovators and entrepreneurs and creators and think beyond the classroom and think beyond ourselves and think beyond Rochester and Monroe County. And that's what's so special about bringing attention to projects like this. And I think it's just fitting that the Gambit technology has returned here. It's back home where it belongs in Monroe County. And it's the innovation that drove its creation and is not only woven in our history, but it's also, I think, the roadmap to the future and the future of all the young people who are here, because it serves as a great reminder of how proud we are and should be as a city and a county of our history of cutting-edge work in optics. And it's inspiring to be here with you folks as well, to see some of the people who worked on this top secret project today. Your historic work, a secret that you couldn't share for more than 4 decades, is something that I couldn't even imagine. I'm in a field where I have to tell people what I do every day. You had to go home and keep it all to yourself. That's just amazing. But it really does showcase Rochester's foundational role in this development of new technologies. Your work gave sight to top secret reconnaissance satellites that produced the first Cold War era high resolution satellite photography, allowing the United States a bird's eye view of Soviet military and industrial capabilities. What the members of the Eastman Kodak Research and Engineering Unit did back then was nothing short of amazing. They didn't just figure out how to take those pictures from space. They had to figure out how to get that film developed. They had to figure out how to eject those film canisters so they fell through space and were snatched up in midair by Air Force planes that flew that film right back here to Rochester. And this shows how the power of a good idea can really change the world. And the ideas that we generate right here with our entrepreneurs, with our graduates from our great colleges and universities, with our youngsters, like my daughter's second grade class, who are inspired by visits to Rochester Museum Science Center through their innovative companies, like L3 Harris, the owner of the Kodak Research and Engineering Unit that built the Gambit optical system. It's positioned right here in Monroe County on the cutting edge of new era technology, innovation, and excellence. And in fact, a pair of MIT economists recently said that Monroe County, New York, is the best positioned place in the U.S. to lead the country in jump-starting a technology-based economy to turn around our nation. And what will be the next Rochester technology to change the world? It could be in optics, biomedicine, information technology, or something we haven't even dreamed of yet. But I do know this. Today's entrepreneurs and inventors are standing on the shoulders of giants, like the men that you see up here at this table who created this amazing technology, and innovators and our founders like George Eastman, who created so much technology and so much opportunity for us here in Rochester. So I hope that this display will continue to inspire the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs and keep the legacy that we've created here alive and well for generations to come. So thank you very much, and God bless you, and let's keep up the good work here.
Thanks, Adam. As I mentioned, the Research and Engineering, and as Adam mentioned, the Research and Engineering Division responsible for this technology began as a part of Eastman Kodak, and today that same division lives on as a part of L3 Harris. I'd like to introduce Stephanie Dittman, Vice President of Strategy and New Business at L3 Harris, and RMSC trustee, to share a few words about the importance of celebrating the division's history. Stephanie?
Good morning and welcome to today's event. L3 Harris is very honored to be part of today's exhibit opening celebration of the Gambit optical system, a reconnaissance satellite developed by the U.S. government and key industrial partners in the 1960s. I'm sure those who worked on this system would never have imagined we would be publicly celebrating their incredible efforts and this technology in the year 2020. For many reasons, but mostly because it was a highly classified mission. Gambit was America's eyes in space. It was the first American space reconnaissance system to consistently deliver high-resolution photographs targeting mostly Soviet missile silos. Its predecessor, Corona, took pictures of wide swaths of land to identify items of interest, such as airfields and missile sites. But the need for close-up, high-resolution surveillance of those targets led to Gambit. Back then, we collected imagery using cameras and film, both manufactured by Eastman Kodak. And that film was returned in canisters ejected by the satellite and caught mid-air by specially equipped aircraft. Very cool, very cool. And I can't wait to get the parachute here, that would be cool. Eastman Kodak, where I started my career in space, is now part of L3 Harris, and we don't collect intelligence that way anymore. But the groundwork laid by leading-edge scientists, engineers, and manufacturing experts in Rochester during the Cold War is a critical piece of American history that lives on as it has inspired the current generation of engineers, scientists, and manufacturing specialists. I'm proud that the work that began with optical systems like Gambit continues today with the extraordinary aerospace and defense work of thousands of talented L3 Harris employees here in Rochester. To those of you in this room who contributed to this story, thank you. You were the pioneers who developed the new technologies and systems that were critical to keeping our country safe. And congratulations to the Rochester Museum and Science Center for exhibiting this fascinating piece of history right here in our own Strasenburgh Planetarium. We should all be proud of the role that Rochester has played in this rich heritage of science and technology. Thank you very much. This is so cool.
I would like to introduce the Tricia Aquinte, is that correct? I'm sorry, Tricia Aquinte with the Center for the Study of National Reconnaissance. And I have to say that a few months ago when I heard about the National Reconnaissance Office, I had to Google it. And then I was embarrassed at having to do that, but last night over dinner I found out that the actual existence of the NRO was classified up until like the late 90s, so it's okay that I had to Google it. So I'd like to introduce Tricia to say a few words and introduce our panel. Trish?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Tricia Aquinte, it's not a secret. I'm the Senior Curator at the National Reconnaissance Office, and I am so thrilled to be here today to bring this very significant and priceless artifact of national security back home to Rochester, where it was carefully developed, conceived of, and crafted. The Center for the Study of National Reconnaissance at the NRO is very committed to providing access to our hundreds of heritage assets and artifacts for the purpose of advancing the science and understanding of national reconnaissance. In this case, the Gambit spy satellite camera that you see here in the lobby represents the NRO's and our nation's enduring innovation and technical capability to overcome global threats. When these capabilities become obsolete, it is the responsibility of the NRO to declassify and release information as much as possible while continuing to protect national security. The Gambit satellite program was declassified by the NRO in September 2011, and many artifacts of the program, including 2 full Gambit space vehicles, have been put on display in museums across the nation. But why are we here in Rochester today? Well, you've heard a little bit about that already, but 60 years ago, given the national security requirement to see greater photographic detail from space, the people here in this community proposed the idea of this camera, which you'll hear a lot more about today in our expert panel. But this particular camera, one of what we think was of 45 total created, was actually crafted and put together here about 54 years ago in secret, down the street. We believe that this particular camera was never launched, but put into storage years later when the program closed. In the 1980s, it was moved to an NRO storage facility to be preserved as an NRO heritage asset. And then this camera in the lobby remained in storage until 2019, when we were able to sign a loan agreement with the Rochester Museum and Science Center to put it on display here, back at home in Rochester, where it was created so many years ago. After 54 years, this camera here has finally returned to honor those who had a hand in supporting our nation and the NRO mission during the Cold War. So thank you. We at the NRO are very grateful that we have this opportunity to return this critical system to your care, the Rochester community. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. James Outson, the director of the NRO's Center for the Study of National Reconnaissance, who will be moderating our expert panel today. Dr. Outson.
Good morning. David Bronstein, a Soviet grandmaster of chess, once said, the most powerful weapon in chess is to have the next move. And during the Cold War, chess became a kind of proxy for the tensions between the world's two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. And the proxy war in chess began at the same time the Cold War began. In September of 1945, there was a radio chess competition that lasted 4 days in September, where the moves of the chess pieces were broadcast over the radio. There were 20 matches played, and prior to that chess match, the United States had dominated international chess, but it ended in that particular competition with the Soviets winning 15.5 of those 20 matches and the United States winning the remaining matches. Bronstein was one of the players on that Soviet team. For the remaining decades of the Cold War, there would continue to be this tension, this competition between these chess teams. Well, we're not here today to talk about chess. We're here to talk about the phenomenal Gambit photo reconnaissance system that was conceived here in Rochester, built here in Rochester, and here in Rochester, where the intelligence film came from space, was developed, processed, and made available to intelligence analysts to answer hard questions facing the United States in carrying out our national security priorities. With that being said, though, chess can really help explain this grand match between these two powers. Following the conclusion of World War II, the United States continued its pre-war proclivities of an open society where people could move around freely. We had access across the United States to travel and observe conditions. By contrast, however, in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Bloc countries, societies were becoming more and more closed, leading Winston Churchill to declare the descent of an Iron Curtain across Eastern Europe. Conditions were similar to a chessboard. This represents the United States. You can see clearly the layout of the chess pieces because we were an open society. We were able to observe conditions in the nation. By comparison, on the other side, we see nothing. However, if we remove the cover, this represents a view that the Soviets had of the world. They were able to observe both sides because they could move freely around the United States. In comparison, the United States had very limited access to information, basic information that we now need for understanding adversaries like maps, directories. Those kinds of things were not available. We needed to know more in order to understand what our adversaries were facing. An interesting way to think about the differences, in 1959, Premier Khrushchev visited the United States. And as part of that visit, he had the opportunity to travel out to the West Coast. And he made a visit, he made a trip from Los Angeles to San Jose to visit a facility, an IBM facility in San Jose. In order to get from Los Angeles to San Jose, he took a train. The train runs through the United States Launch Complex, Vandenberg Air Force Base. So, as you might expect, Premier Khrushchev had a few folks along with him to observe conditions as they traveled through the United States. So what we needed was the means to both peer over this Iron Curtain and listen over this Iron Curtain. And as a consequence, in the late 1950s, we started investing into satellite technology. In June of 1960, the United States launched its first successful reconnaissance satellite. It was a signals collection satellite known as GRAB, or the Galactic Radiation and Background Satellite. Its purpose was to listen over that Iron Curtain. In August of that same year, we launched the first successful photo reconnaissance satellite, which was the Corona system. It allowed us to look over that Iron Curtain, to peer underneath what was happening. But those systems alone were not sufficient to understand the complete state of play between the two adversaries. We still only had a partial view. We could see the players on the chessboard, so to speak, but like many of you in the back of the room, you can't see exactly which pieces are where, what the next move could be. That took an additional technology, and that technology is sitting here behind us today. It was the Gambit system, and with the introduction of the Gambit system, we in the United States were able to gain this kind of view of the world. We could see in detail where the pieces of the chessboard were at. It gave us the kind of information that we could take the next move a piece of the chessboard so that checkmate would not occur and the piece could be protected. That is the contribution that the Gambit system made. In its last generation, the Gambit system was able to obtain imagery that would allow us to see an object the size of this chessboard from space. So within a matter of a few years, we went from seeing nothing on the chessboard to seeing an object actually this size from space. And it's because of the Gambit system that this was possible. Now, sometimes in life, we make moves that are both high risk and high reward. In chess, those kind of moves are called a gambit. So it's not surprising that when Brigadier General Robert Greer made the decision of what to name the Gambit system, he chose the term Gambit. And Gambit is now home where it belongs, here in Rochester. It's now my opportunity to introduce those individuals who are representing the many, many thousands of men and women who worked on the Gambit system to make it possible. One thing that they asked me to do is emphasize that they're representing the Eastman Kodak workforce that made this critical system possible. They were all young engineers when they first started working at Kodak, and went on to have very distinguished careers, very accomplished individuals. Barry Blake and Paul Haas and Barry Blake were part of the original Gambit proposal, working on Gambit during the original proposal area, both joining in 1960. Dave McDowell, going down the line here, was a young engineer who was assigned to systems engineering and joined the program in 1959. And John Schaefer, again, another young engineer, was responsible for optics testing of the Gambit vehicle, joining the program in 1962. We also have with us Tom Maltzby, who's to my immediate left here. Tom was a very young captain when he came to Rochester to serve here as a technical representative for the government. And these individuals will give us a little bit of direct insight into their efforts to work on and build the Gambit system that made this critical contribution to the national security of the United States. So my first question will be for you, Mr. Maltzby. What conditions existed in the late 1950s that led Kodak to taking a leading role in developing the nation's high-resolution photo reconnaissance systems.
The Air Force was interested in satellite reconnaissance from shortly after the Second World War, and the military specifically was looking at near real-time intelligence. So they wanted a system that could take an image from space and transmit it to the ground in near real time. There were two kinds of systems available for that. Television, which they understood how to transmit easily, but limited the resolution. Or there was film, which provided the best resolution, but was more difficult to get to the ground. In order to transmit it, you had to scan it. Before you could scan it, you had to develop it. And developing film usually involves immersing it in a bath of liquid, and liquid doesn't work very well in zero gravity in space. Most of the contractors were limited by the ability to process that. Kodak was teamed with Lockheed at the time, and they solved that problem by one of their other innovations, which was a film-based system. They took the liquids and put it in a gel, put it on the backing of the film, and they could push the two together with the negatives and develop it in space without the need for liquids. The system, as Kodak developed, was the first imaging system put on contract in the United States for space reconnaissance. And it worked perfectly well. The limitation was we didn't have the 5G networks we have for our cell phones today. So getting this to the ground took so long that it became not a very useful system. It wasn't due to fly until '61. We needed an interim system, Corona, that's been mentioned. They were going to use film, and they would bring it back in a reconnaissance bucket, a vehicle that would be brought back and caught in the air. This started the first launch in January of '59, and for the next 18 months, they had 13 successive failures of one nature or another. Before we ever got our first image back from space, before we had ever flown our first imaging satellites, Kodak came up with an unsolicited proposal for the hardware you see behind you, which at the time was called Sunset Strip Proposal. It was a strip camera. Many of you may remember the television series 77 Sunset Strip. Well, this is a strip camera, and it's a 77-inch focal length system. So it is Sunset Strip. They proposed this, which was, at the time, in 1960, probably close to beyond the state of the art. And developing this was incredibly difficult. And these folks will tell you about that effort. However, this is a camera. It's not the system, it's not the satellite. It was had to have a booster like an Atlas and an Agena to get it to orbit, and it had to have a satellite wrapped around it in order to provide command and control and attitude control for the camera itself to take the pictures, and then it relied on a re-entry vehicle to bring it back so they could send it back to Kodak, the ultimate Kodak mailer. This, at the time, the government, we didn't know anything about space, so the government contracted with specialists. We turned to our aircraft manufacturers for missile airframes, Convair, Martin, and Douglas. We turned to contractors like Lockheed for satellite control vehicles. Obviously, we turned to Kodak for cameras. GE was doing re-entry vehicles. So for Gambit, all these things had to be bought by the government, tested, sent to Vandenberg, to a missile assembly building. We tested them again. We put them together, integrated them, put them on a launch vehicle, and launched them. The mission, however, was, as General Greer described, one good picture. And all these components had to work for the Kodak hardware to produce that one good picture, which from the government's perspective was the ultimate Kodak moment.
Thank you, Tom. For the panel members, I'd like you to just go back in time and tell us a little bit about what it was like to work for Kodak in the 1950s and 1960s when you first started out on the Gambit program. So any of you who would like to take a shot at answering that question? Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. Well, to this point, you've heard about the large picture stuff, all the exciting stuff. So what we're going to do is going to bring you down to the other end and what it was like in bowels of the organization to pull this off. First of all, very early in the program, we took up residence at the Hawkeye plant that's on the corner of St. Paul and Driving Park. I'm sure you all know where that is. We were located in the northernmost section of that building, which have come to understand was a Blair camera factory or something like that. Emphasis on the word factory. It was a really old building, had wood floors, no air conditioning. In a word, Spartan would be the best way perhaps to describe it. However, that was fine, but it was pretty old. The area was, and we moved into that in early late 1960, early 1961. We did get a little start at Lincoln Plant, but basically we moved over there. The area had to be made secure, so that in order to gain entry, of course, you had to know the key code and your way in. So we were isolated from the world, but it was a one-way isolation. Nobody could come in, and that was good, actually. We were isolated from the large bureaucracy of a 14,000 employee division, and I come to learn later in my career that's not all bad. But on the other hand, Hawkeye had some pretty nice facilities, and we were able to go outside of our area and have a nice cafeteria and a medical department and company store and all that good stuff. So it was kind of, in a way, an advantage to be in this old building. And being old, it was just fine. That was never an issue. That was the way it was, and we just lived with it. So, and one other thing that Dr. Alson and I would mention is that staffing up, we almost had a ready staff because a project at Lincoln Plant, E2, as somebody mentioned, the old Stamos program, was coming to an end. And therefore all of those people, including all of us here, perhaps except John, were suddenly available. So we all just packed up our desks and moved to Hawkeye. So we had a ready staff, and all of those people already had clearance. So we were able to hit the ground running pretty fast on the program over at Hawkeye. And just one last comment on the head count. The project at Hawkeye, once we were rolling, as best I can tell, going back and doing some figuring, we had between 160 and 175 people at Hawkeye working on this project. And of those, only a really small number, only between maybe 25 and 35 of engineers just in the design of the hardware that you see behind me and the systems activity that they worked on, just those two groups, that was the number. And as Dr. Alson said, we were a pretty young bunch. We were all 25, so you can all do your math right now. And it was great. So that's a little bit quickly setting the background. In addition, we had outside contractors and so on, but basically 160 or 70 people at Hawkeye. So that's a little bit of a starting point. Dr. Johnson.
I think the most important thing to most of us who worked then was that this was a classified program. We were newly out of college. We had never been involved in anything like this. And to all of a sudden find that you had a job that you couldn't talk to anybody about. You couldn't tell your family. When we would travel, we would tell our wife or whoever you were responsible to that here was a phone number to call if there was a problem. They would contact us, and then we could call home. But in fact, when we would travel, we didn't travel as Eastman Kodak Company. In fact, we had to strip all Eastman Kodak Company ID out of our wallets. And we had private credit cards. And a travel agency would make our reservations.
and no more than 2 or 3 of us could travel on any one flight. Because the whole idea was to minimize the potential identification of Kodak involved in these kinds of things. And in fact, up until 2011, we couldn't even tell our families that we'd worked on this. One fascinating thing to me was, and I was involved in 57, I was in the E1, E2, Samos and Lincoln plant. And when Sputnik went up in October of 57, that was the first time a satellite had flown around the Earth. And that was fascinating for us because it said, yeah, what we're wanting to do probably will work. And in fact, some of us sat down and computed the orbital data for Sputnik. And yes, we use slide rules. We use Marchant calculators and log tables because that was the most advanced technology we had in those days. And we computed the orbit, we computed the ground path over Rochester for the next week or so. And one of the gentlemen, one of the young engineers in our group, who many of you know, Chuck Spoolhoff, had just built a 6-inch reflecting telescope. He took his telescope and photographed that satellite based on our calculations. Now, the most fascinating thing of all was that nobody really knew whether a near-Earth body would behave all the classical orbital mechanics that we're depending on to tell where it was going to be. And because he photographed it where we said it would be, that was tremendous reassurance. Now, lots of other people in the country did it too, I'm sure. I mean, every physicist in the world was looking at that kind of an issue. But remember, these satellites were going around the Earth at about 100 miles, which is about the same as taking a piece of cardboard and wrapping it around a basketball that's a foot in diameter. That's how close it is to the Earth. And when that's showed that, to at least a first approximation, it was behaving orbital mechanics, that said, yeah, we've got to go for these kinds of reconnaissance equipment.
Thank you both for your insights on that. My next question for the panel members to consider, maybe Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Haas, if you could think about and respond to this question. How is it that you as a Kodak team were able to do something that no other nation, no other group of people have been able to do, and that's build a high-resolution telescope system, a satellite, spy satellite, that worked in space? So would somebody be willing to respond to that? Mr. Haas, thank you.
Well, John's going to talk about the optical part. I'm going to talk about the harsh environment. Space is tough. It's near vacuum, 100 miles up, there's no air. It's also in sunlight or shadow, so you have the sun beating down on it very hard, trying to warm it up, and then it flies over to the dark side of the Earth, and it's all of a sudden everything it's looking at is cold, and it's cooling off. Things tend to like to move when you heat them up or cool them down. Optical systems don't like to move. They aligned on the Earth, and you'd like them to be in exactly the same place once they're up there, and that is a real challenge. You see a lot of aluminum or shiny surfaces there. That's to avoid reflective heat coming in and landing. It bounces much of it back off as you can. If you happen to look on the other side of this, you'll see a box over there that's got 6 connectors, and they don't have anything connected to them. They've got little yellow protectors on the end. That's where all of the incoming commands and power to our hardware came in, and then the instrumentation indicating that things had performed hopefully as anticipated went back out to the satellite so it could be telemetered to Earth. That's how we the people flying the satellite actually knew it was working according to plan, hopefully, which we actually had pretty good fortune on that subject. John?
First of all, I guess I would like to let you know I cringe a little bit when someone calls this a camera. It is a camera optical assembly is the correct term. The camera is the box on the other side that the film goes through. I'd like to briefly try to describe the optics in the system. The optical design is called a Maxitov lens design, designed by a Russian optician in 1941. Kind of ironic, isn't it? So the Maxitov lens design is a 77-inch focal length, 6.5 feet. You look at the lenses in front of the press photographers at the Super Bowl, you know, they may be a foot or 2 feet long. This is 6.5 feet long. The characteristic is it has a transmission and meniscus lens in the opening of the lens. You can't see it when you look here. That is a 4-inch thick piece of glass, 21 inches in diameter. The other aspect of a Maxitov design, the primary mirror in the far right-hand side of this is a spherical mirror 28 inches in diameter with a 14-foot radius of curvature. Because of the weight problems in trying to launch a system like this, it was the first time I think anyone has ever made a lightweight mirror design. We worked with Corning glass and we had a 1/2-inch thick front plate, a 3/4-inch thick rear plate, and the interior part was cross-hatched egg crate construction, which reduced the weight of the mirror by somewhere around 50%. The film used in this system was 9.5-inch wide film that was going through the camera. The optical system produced an image that filled that 9.5-inch film. In order for this optical system to see the Earth, the only optic you can see when you look at this is the 33-inch mirror that's set in front of it. That was called a stereo mirror. And it looked down to the Earth. So the light from the Earth hit the stereo mirror, went through the optical system, and down to the focal point. That also is a lightweight mirror. It can move forward and aft by plus or minus 15 degrees. So as this is flying over the Earth, you can get stereo image photography, which was very helpful to the photo interpreters. The tolerances on these mirrors, in order to get the optimum resolution, where a 10th wavelength of light was supposed to be the requirement for it. That's about 2 millionths of an inch, about a thousandth the thickness of a human hair. Another example is looking at that flat mirror in the front. The flatness of that 33-inch mirror is expanded to the size of New York State, 500 or 600 miles. There will be no deviation greater than 2 inches. Our test equipment in order to evaluate these things was state-of-the-art, and in many cases was only qualitative, wouldn't allow us to put numbers on it. So we assembled some systems that sometimes had to be taken apart and reassembled to get the quality. There were a lot of schedule pressures because the ultimate goal was to produce one of these units a month for our customers. So it was a very challenging time. Tell them the resolution for this. Buffalo to Europe.
Oh, yeah. Dave commented this morning, for example, we were flying 100 miles over the Earth. If this vehicle was in Buffalo looking back at Rochester, on the other side of Buffalo, you probably could be able to read Kodak on the top of the Kodak tower. That's like your chessboard.
Thank you, gentlemen. Could you share with us some of the pressures and obstacles that you felt in or experienced in designing this very sophisticated system, and how you dealt with those pressures and addressed the obstacles in your workplace and also at home, because there are challenges that come up at home in terms of the sacrifices that you need to make to develop the system and make it operational. So any of the panel members that would like to respond to that question? Yes, Mr. Sheehan.
Just a quick comment following up on the last statement I made. We were supposed to get one of these units out a month. We worked very long hours. In many cases, it was a declared 48-hour week. You got to see the family and the kids on Sunday. So it was, and because everybody was under the same pressure, There was a lot of camaraderie among the people working on it. And no matter how busy you were, or someone else was, if you had a question, they'd be more than willing to sit down and talk to you about it. So it was a terrific work environment when we were here.
Just one comment about that work environment. There was better esprit de corps and better cooperation than in that era of the R&E than ever seen before or since anywhere else. The esprit de corps, the teamwork, the whole feeling. We were working together, we couldn't talk about it outside, but we all knew that it was critical for the success of the United States in the Cold War. There was an attitude there that I've never found anywhere else that also led to some of the best systems engineering that existed anywhere in the world. We had a top systems engineering team of young engineers, a few older ones too, but mostly young engineers, that was willing to take on anything. And they did a good job. And that was the coordination that allowed us to do this and make it happen.
I would just add to that answering the question of pressures, first of all, you probably got a feeling here that everything in the system was new and needed development. There was really not much old there. Everything had to be invented. So that was certainly a pressure that kept us busy. However, as I stand back and look at this, I have to say, nothing was overwhelming. We never let it. There were challenges, but I never felt overwhelmed, and I think the rest of the guys would say that too. Just dig in and do it. I never felt to be at sea. I almost want to say that we almost thrived on it. It was just the excitement of doing it. I can safely say to a degree, we thrived on it. Now, with regard to the impact on home life that some of you have mentioned, to me, it was just never a big deal. We had a lot of security requirements, but you just dealt with it. So to me, it was important, and yes, it put a little bit of strain on things, but generally, I'd say it was not a big deal, and we didn't let it become a big deal. The schedule, of course, was a constant pressure point.
Yeah, they mentioned overtime. I vividly recall waiting quite a few weeks. I think it was about 8 weeks for my clearance when I first came to the company. I couldn't start the clearance process until I was actually on board. And then I sat around for 8 weeks with very little to do, watching the clock at Lincoln Plant. And one day they came in and said, okay, you're passed, you're cleared. I got briefed that day on the program. I was excited, so I called home and said, Mary Ann, I've been briefed, I'm cleared, I'm ready to work, and oh, by the way, I'm working overtime tonight.
Next question for you. The late 1950s and early 1960s in world history were really perilous times. We had the emerging Soviet threat, Soviet weapon capabilities, in particular nuclear weapon capabilities that we didn't understand completely. In 1957 with the Sputnik launch, that propelled a lot of individuals to focus their careers on science and technologies. I'm just curious to know what effect did the national security environment have on the work that you were carrying out and sort of the imperative for being successful in making this very complex machine work in a space environment? Yeah, well, no, just got to give them a little time to think here, Mr. Shaver.
I'll open my mouth. The technical challenges were so critical and so important, and we were working so hard on them. You knew the national security thing, but in my case, was not an overriding thing. It was important that we were doing something good for the country. That made you feel good. We were young, and a lot of our friends from back home were drafted at that time, and they were in service. We did not have that. We, in many cases, had deferments that we could work on this system. So we had it a lot better than they did, and we were hopefully working on some systems that would make their life better in the long term. So that was the issue. Anybody else?
I think it just emphasized to us how important what we were doing was, and most of us weren't very politically oriented, so we kept on with the technical.
Well, I think Dave was in the systems group, so he was more involved with the big picture stuff, the orbital kinds of stuff, and a little more sensitive to the national issues perhaps. Down at the engineering hardware development level, I have to say I felt kind of buffered from that. We were so busy with the components of the system that we were responsible for, that's what, when I went home at night, that's what I was thinking about. Are the gears going the right way? And that kind of stuff. So personally, while I was certainly sensitive to the national importance of this program, it really wasn't in my mind on a daily basis at all. I was focused on the electrical design job at hand.
One other thing I wanted to mention that was kind of exciting for both Barry and I, when we finally had delivered the first, or were about to deliver the first of these payloads to the government, we learned that we were supposed to help them fly it also. And there's instrumentation comes down, they wanted people there that could understand the instrumentation and whether things were working well, and if they weren't, is there any workaround, or is this a lost cause this time? So we ended up getting pressed into service to help fly the first of these satellites, and actually a rehearsal prior to that was kind of an interesting experience. But we'd fly out to Sunnyvale where the blue cube is, I guess. I don't know, does it have a better name than that? Anyway, that was the place that actually was responsible for sending up the commands and determining what to take pictures of and all that sort of thing. And there would be a team of people there. The other contractors knew this was coming, so they had plenty of people. Kodak was very thin on people. We ended up drafting the engineers who had a pretty good idea of what was going on, and we had, of course, satellites don't rest. They go 24 hours a day, so all the other contractors had 3-shift operation. We had 2-shift operation, 13 hours with an hour overlap. So that was an exciting part of it.
If I may, I'd like to add just one comment to that. I don't get excited over very many things, but I have to say it was exciting to be a part of this out there, reading the telemetry and deciding. And after that, really quick, because if something's wrong, you got minutes to decide what you're going to do about it before the next orbit. But the most memorable event on the entire program, probably for me, of everything, was I happened to be in the control room when we're going to catch the first bucket. And so at that point, they patched us into the radio link between the aircraft and the ground. And a voice comes over the radio that says, it was the aircraft, and it says, "This is Chase 1. They had Chase 1 was the name of the C-130 that was going to make the pass. And I assumed there was a Chase 2 and a Chase 3 just in case. Anyway, so the voice contacts the ground and says Chase 1 is going to make the pass. And pretty soon a voice comes up, an authoritative voice comes over the radio and says, "Who's the pilot?" And aircraft responded, "This is Colonel so-and-so." And at that point, there was an Air Force officer in the room with us. And he said, "Well, Colonel so-and-so is going to change rank, and it's going to only in case of which way."
Thank you. Well, done my best to try and prepare questions for the panel, and we have time for one or two questions from you. If there's somebody there that would like to ask the panel a question, please feel free to at this point. I'll hand over here.
So as a very proud son of one of the members of your team over the years, I'd like to say thank you so very much for all of your efforts, just for us, for the country, for everything. And I'll ask a question I hope you can answer. One of the things that struck me over the years was the secrecy, the ability to keep the secrecy. And I'm wondering if there were any leaks, if there over the years that you can talk about, how those were mitigated, or if you don't want to talk about any of that, maybe some stories of how you avoided leaks with your family members.
So how did you avoid the leaks with your family members, or dealing with your family members when they
do you have any, were there any kind of interesting things, while what do you do at work while I work in the kitchen?
I was able to successfully not talk about it at home. But my wife used to tell people, oh, he works at Kodak and I don't know what he does, probably pushes a broom. The other thing we did to help relieve the tension, often you'd be at a party and there'd be other people at the same party that you knew that you suspected were cleared or maybe knew they were cleared. And so we learned to talk in code. For example, if you said, somebody would say, where do you work? Well, I'm at Lincoln Plant in Unit 7. And immediately, that would say that you worked on E1 and E2. Or if, oh, I work at Hawkeye on the third floor, and in a corner of the building, that immediately told somebody else where you worked, as long as they were in the know. And so then you could pass comments back and forth without really breaking any security at all.
And the universal bailout, if somebody presses, as you say, well, the project is Kodak proprietary, because there were many proprietary Kodak projects going on all the time, and we all worked on them sometime in our career. So I never really had anybody press it. We're dodging your question about what little it is.
I meant to you.
I spent 37 years at Kodak, about half of it in the research and engineering, the first 10 years and the last 10 years, and the middle 17 years out in the real Kodak. And I have to say that I ended up with some jobs that were more prestigious, but I didn't end up with any job that was more exciting and more fun than the first assignments I had at Lincoln Plant and Hawkeye and working on the satellite programs.
I would say in a sentence, it was a great grounding for moving on to other careers at Kodak. And I think we all had very good careers at Kodak, but it was a grounding. So it's responsibility and the breadth of responsibilities.
Looking back, the fact that we were able to achieve the goals that the company had committed to and do it with a bunch of young engineers that were inventing the tools they had to use as they went along. Looking back, it's exciting. And to me, the one thing that stands out is that calculation of Sputnik and the fact that that validated everything that we were hoping to do.
I think looking back, it's a sense of pride and amazement at what we were able to accomplish. And also looking back at the relationships we built with people. I just met a gentleman today that I played on a softball team during the summer that we worked together, and I hadn't seen him in 70 years, 60 years, I don't know. Anyhow, we built a lot of fantastic relationships with people that have carried through this day. And a retiree group of people is still meeting monthly and with various speakers. For the 385th consecutive month, I think they've met. And that says something about the camaraderie of the people that worked on these programs.
I'll give you a little perspective from the governance side of this. Having lived covertly in this program in Kodak as an Air Force representative, I've dealt with a lot of contractors, and I would have to say Kodak is unique in that regard. Being part of their team and adopted and embraced by them, yet remaining aloof and being a customer representative at the same time. I've worked with a lot of contractors, and Kodak was by far the easiest and best to work with that. There was a sense of national accomplishment and national pride that transcended companies, transcended organizations, and they were among the best contractors in the country that I've ever dealt with for dealing with this and produced a product that served the country very well in a dangerous period of time.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for participating in the panel today and representing many of you who are here. Thank you, Kodak, for making this possible. I can tell you to come here is a privilege for us. To be able to have this opportunity to meet with you and return home this beautiful artifact. And thank you to RMSC for all that you've done to make this possible. You've been a terrific organization to work with, and we are grateful for every effort that you've made to make a home for the Gambit optical system. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Please enjoy the coffee. You are more than welcome to take pictures of the Gambit, and please come back as we improve this exhibition over the next year and a half. Have a great day. Thanks.